Today we're going to talk about Hydrangea paniculata, and I'm standing underneath a very fine specimen of Hydrangea paniculata. And these are the most widely grown hydrangeas of any in the UK. They're quite variable, and they come largely from Japan and a little bit into China, where they can tolerate minus 20 degrees temperatures, and they can also tolerate a great degree of dry conditions in the summer. So looking at this Hydrangea paniculata Grandiflora, one of the old originals dating back 120 years when it was first introduced into this country. And if you look at the individual flower heads, you will see that the vast majority of the flowers are actually sterile, in that they are what we would describe as a mop head hydrangea, and basically all florets and no flowering parts that are going to set seed. The flower isn't completely out yet, but when it is completely out, you'll see that there are very few individual flowers which are actually going to set seed. And really this is a plant for display. And just look at the size of this plant. It was planted about 25 years ago. In reality, Hydrangea paniculata should be pruned every year to encourage larger flowers, and you prune back to within 5 to 7 centimeters of this year's new growth, and you then encourage new growth, and you keep the plant down to a reasonable size, which it clearly isn't here, but none the worse for that, you might say. The other thing you see is that Hydrangea paniculata likes to be in full sun, and where it's more in the shade, the flowers are smaller, and there are lots of stems that don't have any flowers on them in the shade, but in the sun every single stem has this gigantic great mop head flower. And when they're fully out, they can weigh, with a bit of water on them perhaps, nearly 1 kilo each. So in strong winds or perhaps in very wet weather they can flop a bit, but in the dry summer we've been having this year, just look at the array of flower. Today there are about 140 different named varieties of Hydrangea paniculata, but I'm just going to concentrate on a few that have won an award of garden merit over the years. The RHS have done 2 trials in the last 30 years on Hydrangea paniculata and selected maybe 15 or 20 varieties as being worthy of having the award of garden merit, and this is one of them, Hydrangea paniculata Kyushu. Kyushu is an island off Japan, and this plant was introduced by Collingwood Ingram about 100 years ago, and you can see that the flower heads are radically different from those that we looked at a moment ago. There are relatively few florets, and there are many more fertile and much smaller flowers in each flower head. Kyushu is a very, very tolerant and vigorous grower, as you can see here, and the panicles of flowers again are much larger where it gets more direct sunlight, and tough as old boots is how I would put it. And when you look at Kyushu next to a startling blue hydrangea, you see what lovely contrasts you can have in the world of hydrangeas. But Hydrangea paniculata, which grows worldwide, is certainly the toughest and the most widely grown in UK gardens, because it's so much easier. No worries about whether it's going to come blue or pink or purple in different soils. These paniculators are the same in any soil. So this is Hydrangea paniculata unique, which was bred by the de Belder family in Europe in 1968 and is reputed to have the biggest flowers of any of the paniculators. And you can see looking at this plant that actually the flowers aren't anything like fully developed, even at the very top of the plant. And so I can't really prove to you that these flowers are going to be bigger than those you saw on Grandiflora. And like many of the paniculators, the differences are really quite small. This plant, however, was cut back to the base about 3 years ago, and so it's recovered almost to its full size very quickly indeed. And if you just look at one or two of the biggest flower heads, you will see how monstrously large they actually are. This is Hydrangea paniculata tardiva, and it's a bit later flowering than some of the other of the paniculators, and it has rather shorter inflorescences, but more actual fertile flowers than sterile florets. And the mistake we've made here is that these plants are growing in full shade, and when you look here at this one plant that's got a bit more light, you can see that actually it looks very much better. And Tardiva is again a popular variety, possibly because it's late flowering and possibly because it's more delicate and slightly less gross and vulgar than some of its compatriots. So here is a clump of Hydrangea paniculata Vanille Fraise, and it's the first time that I'm able to show you the other great attraction that these paniculators have, and it earns its name Vanille Fraise for a very good reason, because once the flowers have been out for a day or two, they start to turn this lovely pink colour, which will eventually go much more red. And if you come here in a month's time, you'll be looking at a whole bunch of reddish flowers rather than the white ones you're seeing today. And this clump of about 3 or 4 plants was put in on a very steep and rather stony bank only about 12 years ago. And look at the growth that they've made. I say it against ourselves, but they've never been pruned, and to the purists that might be wrong, but actually in a woodland garden context, has it made any difference to this remarkable group of plants flowering their heart out in the last days of July? So now we're going to look at a few newer varieties of Hydrangea paniculata, which been bred more recently and are more recent arrivals into the Bernkoos Nurseries catalogue. And this is Hydrangea paniculata polar bear, and I think you can see where it got its name. Very large flower heads, not terribly vigorous and tall growing, and doesn't it look great with Hydrangea aspera villosa flowering away behind it. But again, when you look closely at the individual flowers, you see that you're going to get a hint of pink coming in already, and soon there'll be more than a hint of pink. Quite why a polar bear would need a hint of pink, I leave to your own imagination. But again, you can see that these are very uniform flower heads, with everything being sterile florets rather than being fertile flowers. I think it's a wonderful new introduction, and certainly one that will stand the test of time. So here's a complete contrast to the one we just looked at. This is Hydrangea paniculata early sensation, and it's one of the very first to come into flower, and hence its name. And here we already see that the older florets have gone pink and then red, but at the same time secondary shoots and secondary new growth is producing white flowers, so you get this lovely effect with pink and white on the same bush. And the added attraction of this early sensation is these lovely red stems, which add quite a bit to the display. And if you just look behind Early Sensation, you see Hydrangea sargentiana, another species completely, but don't the two look good growing side by side? They complement each other in the coloration, although the leaves are very different. And another very new one, which we're only just trying out at Bernkoos, is Hydrangea paniculata Skyfall. And when you look closely at the large florets, you see that the shape of the florets is very different to the shape we've seen on some of the others. And it starts off this lovely lime colour, and then as the flower matures, as you should now come to expect, we get pink tints, and those pink tints will become much more pronounced. Perhaps not as vigorous a grower as some of the others we've seen, but new and a bit different. And again, Bernkoos now stocks these, and if that one takes your fancy, then come on down to the nursery and have a look. If I had my own personal preference for the best Hydrangea paniculata, I think it would definitely be Vanille Fraise. And we're now looking at another small group of plants which were planted very much more recently, but because they're in more full sun than the group we looked at before, you can now see the pinks and the reds coming through very much more clearly. And look how impressive that is as a garden plant. Just a little bit more shade and you get some whiter flowers. Where they're in more sun, you get the proper Vanille Fraise effect. These are only a few of the many varieties of Hydrangea paniculata which exist, and if you were to go to Bernkoos nurseries tomorrow, you would see other different varieties which are equally nice but which we haven't today talked about. It's really a matter of your choice of how you want the flower head to look and how much pink you want to get out of it, as well as the beautiful white colours or lime green colours they start with.